Hello, environmental sociology students, and welcome to class. If you're not exactly sure what environmental sociology is, don't feel bad. A lot of my colleagues, even those who are sociologists, don't know what it is either. I'm Dr. Eileen Smith-Cavros, and I'll be your professor for the next few weeks. So what is environmental sociology? It's basically a very simple thing with a long name, and it is the study of the interactions between people and the environment. I say between because the environment certainly influences, not determines, but influences a lot about human societies. And in turn, human societies and human individuals can influence the environment as well. And we're going to see this in an awful lot of examples this semester, from consumption to population to climate change. Today, what I would like to talk a little bit about is a concept that most of you have probably heard of before, hopefully in your Introduction to Sociology classes, and that is the idea of the sociological imagination and how that pertains to humans and the environment. The sociological imagination was defined and explained by one of my favorite sociologists, a fellow named C. Wright Mills. I really enjoy Mills. He's a social conflict theorist, and he worked a lot on social justice issues. He theorized about them a lot, and he had an awful lot of opinions about them. He was a very opinionated fellow. And his idea of the sociological imagination was the idea that many people look at their own lives and they see problems and challenges in their own lives as very private issues as opposed to public issues. So they see kind of bad things that happen to them or challenges and problems that they have as personal issues. Whereas in reality, Mills described many of these issues as being public issues, issues that were affected by society and could only be solved basically when people got together in groups to do so. And I believe that if Mills were alive today, he would be very concerned about many of the environmental issues that we're going to talk about, and that he would very easily apply this sociological imagination to them. Let me give you an example. And one example is the example of public transportation and transportation in general. We all know that cars are a great challenge for society, and in a lot of ways they're an obstacle to an energy efficient and clean society. You can drive up and down I-95 in Florida or whatever big highway where you live at home, and you can see so many cars go by, many of which don't have very great mileage and fuel standards, and they're very often occupied by one person. Okay, so one person in a very large vehicle driving by themselves. So cars use a great deal of energy, use a great deal of fossil fuels. They put out a great deal of pollution. They even take up a great deal of space when you consider parking spaces and things like that, which even though in many places parking is free, it's a use of land. It's not really free. It just appears to be free. We still pay for it. Cars result obviously in a lot of accidents, a lot of bodily injuries, medical bills. So cars have a price far greater than the actual sticker that's on them. But here we're kind of concerned about their price on the environment. So it would seem like every time we get into one of those cars, I know every time I get into mine, and I get into mine a lot because it's hard not to use a car a lot in South Florida, I feel a lot of guilt when I get into my car because I know all of those things about the pollution, about the energy, etc. Nonetheless, I use my car because I feel like I have to. Now, why do I feel like I have to? Well, if I take a bus in South Florida, it's going to take me a very long time to get to most places, maybe an hour and a half, maybe even more, because I might have to transfer a few times. It would make it pretty difficult for me to get to work, to get home, and to do all of the errands in between, plus my field work, if I didn't have a car. So is that my personal problem that I'm using my car, or is it a public problem because we have not gotten together as a group, as a society, as a city, as a state, as a nation, to get a better public transport system? Well, it was Mill's idea that sometimes in human history, people take what they see as their personal problems and they connect it to a larger issue, a public issue. And sometimes that's how things get done. That's how problems are solved, and that's how improvements are made. So, for example, if people got together in South Florida and demanded a better transportation system, and if they were willing to pay for it, maybe through a tax of some sort, even though taxing is not a very popular word today. So that's the way that Mill saw some people as concentrating on personal issues that really were more public issues. And it was Mill's optimistic belief that sometimes people have a catharsis and can actually change things. A good example of that is probably the Montreal Protocol that you can read about in your book, when people became very concerned with the hole in the ozone layer, and they actually did something about it. Global warming, or climate change, as we are more likely to call it today and more accurately to call it, is one of those issues that hasn't quite been decided on yet. Will people act? Will they see that as a public problem that everyone needs to work on? Or will they not act? We'll have to wait on that one and see. Now, the acting itself leads us to another term called virtual environmentalism. Because one of the challenges is that people will act in a way that's positive for the environment very often if they can do it, and they can do it easily. The problem is it's not always easy to be environmentally responsible. Think about it. You know, I would love to be environmentally responsible and use public transportation. I can only do that if public transportation is better. So that makes it a difficult cycle. But Mill's claim is that the positive change can happen. And a lot of people today call this virtual environmentalism, the change itself. Virtual environmentalism is when you can make an environmental choice without even having to make a choice. You can make a positive step for the environment without having to give up a lot. Okay, so if we improved our transportation infrastructure, for example, to make it even easier to use a bus or a train rather than our car, I wouldn't have to look for a parking space, I wouldn't have to have as much car insurance. Maybe I could even get to work faster on good public transportation, or get to the store faster if my neighborhood were built in a walkable way with a store close by. So if we make these changes and make it almost effortless and thoughtless for people to be environmental, if it's just built into their lives and something that they do, or even something that makes their lives easier, the idea behind virtual environmentalism is that people will be more environmentally conscious, and they will do the right thing, often without even realizing they did it, and without even having to work to do it. So now you've learned a little bit about the sociological imagination, a little bit about virtual environmentalism, and I invite you to read the first chapter in the book and to respond to the discussion question. I really look forward to talking with all of you there. Take care.